Hi, everybody. We're here for Basim Magdy's exhibition at Bilsart, Elephant, Circus Owner and Clowns today. And it's great to have you here in Istanbul, Basim. I'm Eda Berkmen. I'm a curator based in Istanbul. So we'll talk a bit about Basim's practice in general for those of you who might not know a lot about it, and also focus specifically on the works that are on display here. The first one called Crystal Ball, dated 2013, and and the Dent, dated 2014. So some general, and also it might be nice if it runs as a conversation. So whenever if you have questions, please shoot, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, totally.
So Basim, you're trained as a painter in Cairo, where you're born, and then you start experimenting with a lot of other mediums, which includes photography, film, and you use a lot of text. How was that transition for you? Why did you need something outside of painting? What did film enable you to do that painting didn't, maybe?
I actually grew up 5 hours south of Cairo. My father is an artist, so I grew up with a lot of modern art books. When I was a teenager, I knew a lot about modern art. I was looking at a lot of books. I always say that the peak of my knowledge about modern art is being able to tell a Picasso from a Gris from a Braque at the point when they were all making a very identical work. And
you're looking at them always through representations.
Yes,
mostly.
Yes. I didn't know anything about their lives. I was just looking at pictures of their work in books. This was before the internet. And then I was, watching my father make artworks, and then I was also making artworks. And I was in high school, and I decided, well, I'm going to become an artist because that's what I know how to do. There was no art school, so I moved to Cairo to go to art school. And the art school I went to was very traditional. So I studied painting, and it was all like, paint what's in front of you, the way it looks, and this was extremely boring, and I hated it. And I realized after half a year that I'm about to waste the next 4.5 years of my life. But I needed to get a degree, and I couldn't afford to go study outside of Egypt. So I lived 2 separate lives. I would go to art school and make the paintings that they expected me to make with a twist. And that twist was always the part that got me from an A to an A-. Like, my assignments were always like A-, because I would paint a dirty white wall. I would paint it like vermilion, just because it needs to be changed. It's just ugly. Eventually I graduated, and before that, for the 2 years before that, I was, I would finish my assignments and then take the train, go to my parents' house, and make very big, angry, colorful, raw paintings. At this point, I was very influenced by Basquiat, like all young kids. After I graduated, I had my first show in Cairo, and then I had another show, and my work started changing differently, quickly. So I completely grew out of the Basquiat influence. I started developing my own language. Within 3 years, I was invited to do a solo show, and my first idea was, of course, paintings. But then I realized that the paintings were all about the same thing, and they had the same character in them. So I thought, well, it doesn't make sense. I should make an animation. I didn't know how to animate. So I started making the drawings, and
it's looking for movement, is what
they were all. They all had the same characters, and it was there was sort of a very loose narrative connecting all of them, and I was like, why are they on the wall? So I hired someone to animate. And what I learned from that is I don't want to hire someone to animate. I should learn how to do what I need to be done, because I realized that there's a lot that ends up becoming absent from that process, because that person doesn't have the same creative logic like me. That person might not even have any creative logic. They're just doing what I tell them to do. But if I'm doing this process by myself, which I realized later when I started making films. But anyway, that was the first time I decided to get out of making paintings, and then I started making installations, and then I was making these works on paper that were mixing a lot of different media, collage, spray paint, acrylic, oil, colored pencil.
But the film, like shooting film?
That came right after the installation. I came across a Super 8 camera, and that's, you know, for the ones who don't know what that is, it's a film camera that was made for normal people to take on holiday. It was like what existed before, you know, video cameras that you hold and you film with. But it's on actual cinema film, except the film is really, you know, very thin. It's 8 millimeters wide.
And the year of this transition is?
2010. The first
okay, so it's not
film I made was 2010.
So the works
I finished
that
art school in 2000.
Are within like 3 years of
yes, but
starting.
then things started developing really fast after that point. Partly not because partly because I started using film, because when I made films I realized that now I'm working with something that's a lot more complex. There's sound and image and narrative, and I can eliminate one of them, but I like my thinking started developing and growing somehow. I started seeing complexity and multiplicity in things in artworks, but also I was growing as a human being, so slightly more mature, hopefully.
And why is it that you picked like the Super 8 or later 16 millimeter film rather than shooting video, especially thinking animation is more digital? Probably like the first time you were experimenting with animation, it's probably on the computer. And then to transition to a medium that has such a historical connection is like, it's a big jump.
Yeah, it wasn't the historical connection. Okay, so the thing is, I grew up in the south of Egypt, so I did not even know Super 8 cameras existed. I moved to Europe in 2007, and everybody knew what a Super 8 camera was because their grandparents had a Super 8 camera, and there was all these Super 8 films lying around. I didn't know what that was. To me, it was this really fascinating thing that runs on film, that produces films that were not perfect, which connected to painting. They had this grain, which connected to my use of spray paint in painting to create ghostly effects. In the beginning, the connection was very obvious. It's just like, you know, you connect something you don't know to something you know to understand it better. And then I became really interested in the idea of creating a time-based work, a sequence of images, a sequence of sounds, and there's something really beautiful about the fact that you can create poetry with that, because it's fleeting moments. It's something that passes and doesn't come back. A painting, you can stare at it for an hour and it's staying there. It's not going in away. A photograph is the same thing, but a film goes away. And if you're in the movie theater, you can't tell them to rewind that scene because you want to see it again. It's gone. You just have to rely on your memory.
And when you're shooting random, like you don't plan what you're going to shoot. You shoot random encounters, right? Like when you're, traveling, walking around. And does it relate to you trying to capture fleeting moments at all? Like, is it diaristic or no?
Yes, in the beginning more than now, I think. In the beginning, it was more about, because I was also, a Super 8 camera is really small and light. So I would put it in my backpack and go out, and then I see something interesting, or I find myself in an interesting place, and then I film it. Of course, there are a lot of choices within that. It's not completely random. There is the angle, there is the timing, there is the choice of whether to film or not to film. And then as I started using, I think it started when I started using 16 millimeter film, which the transition is actually here. Crystal Ball was shot on Super 8, and then the first film I shot on 16 millimeter was the Dent, and there's like a huge leap in between, also structurally. But I still carry my 16 millimeter camera, which is like this big and made out of iron, so it's like 16
it's
kilos.
Here, it's going around the
I carry it in my backpack every time I travel. But so I film, I find myself in places, but more and more I go to specific places to film, not knowing what I will film, but I know I want to go there to film. I know I need to be inside the crater of a volcano on a Greek island to film the sulfur fumes. What I will do with them
and so
comes
now
later.
You have the script before the film? Or
it goes back
one?
And forth. It depends on the film, and it also goes back and forth. I'm very flexible with this. I've made films where the script was kind of almost present before I filmed. Sometimes I film a lot more, and then I develop the film. I look at it and I write in response to it, and then I go back and I film more, and then And the sound, I record sound all the time. I record on my sound recorder. I record on my phone, and then I just fix it and clean it up and layer it later.
But like the film, for example, you said I need to go inside the volcano and shoot there. Now I know. With the sound, is it also working in a similar way, or is it like you have a collection of random sounds in your studio, and then after you have the script, you go back to a certain folder, or you remember something, or how is it? How is the mixing and matching?
So I create sounds, but I also, that's the beauty of having a phone that can record sound really well. I find myself in front of, for example, a machine that makes this repetitive sound, so I record it with my phone. And sometimes there are very specific sounds that I can't create or I can't have access to. So for example, in Crystal Ball, there's this beeping sound. It's not a beeping sound, it's like a very strong sound. And that's the sound of a submarine sonar. So yeah, there's no way I'm going to go inside a submarine to record the sound of a sonar.
You're actually getting samples of the internet.
But also. I get, there are like directories, like sound directories that are open where people upload for other people to use them as long as it's not, in commercials and stuff like this. So if I'm looking for something very specific, I go and I try to find it. But most of the time is also things that I record myself. Like for example, I wanted to use the sound of the crackling of wood burning. And I wasn't somewhere where I could, put a bunch of wood and burn them and record. So what I did is I recorded the sound of soap bubbles bursting from really close.
And it makes a similar sound.
Yes.
Okay. Oh.
So you kind of like learn to hear things differently also. And it's really enjoyable that I'm constantly, when I started making films, I started paying attention to sounds, to movement, to also to sequences of events and how time works and the absurdity within everything that's around us and how we kind of eliminate the absurd layers to make sense of reality, that it kind of fits with this understanding of logic that we have.
Yeah, some of the questions that I was asking you regarding the production process, I was trying to sort of understand the way that your work connects to randomness and chance, because it's very much ingrained within your production, but it also works as a viewer when you're watching the works. It almost feels like chance encounters between the images that you create with text and then the images that we see passing in the film. So I was wondering how and why the chance or randomness is so important to your work or to you.
Partly because it's part of reality or part of the way I experience reality. This is something that's I'm very aware of, the fact that things don't, like a lot goes unnoticed. So for example, when you're sitting here surrounded by all of those beautiful people, you're looking at the people while you're, but then you don't notice this shadow that's over, almost mirroring itself. And there's always these details in what we encounter that are not, that just pass and they're gone, they're lost forever. So I try not to limit myself to a very structured way of working. One of the things I decided early on when I started making films was that I promised myself that every film will have a new element, even if nobody knows what it is. I mean, sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. At some point, for example, I decided using subtitles. So the Dent was the first one. And then at some point, in another film, I decided that every time a subtitle appears, it's going to be a different color that responds to the color of the image that you're looking at. So it changes color. At some point, I made a film that was animals texting each other. So it's shot on 16mm, but then you see all the text messages appearing on the screen. So there's always something new, structurally, visually, in the way I'm thinking about it, because it's a pity to live once and just do the same thing over and over again.
But is it supposed to be your invention, or can it be you find something by chance in a previous work and then it comes back in the next work? Like
both.
Both.
It's there's no, I mean, nothing comes out of nothing. It's all like one idea leads to another, and then it leads to another idea. Sometimes you eliminate 4 or 5 ideas behind, so it feels like it's a leap, because that's how things evolve. That's how you create progress. But in the end, I have one brain. So it goes like, it goes from here, from A to G. But it's the same, I just eliminated all the letters in between. But yeah, that's how we got there, by thinking of all the other thoughts in between.
And I wanted to ask also about when you're working with the film, there are the light leaks, and also you pickle the film. Maybe it might be nice for you to elaborate what that pickling entails.
So, yeah. When I made Crystal Ball in 2013, I was starting to understand the world around me in a more, or to see it in a more abstract way. I had just witnessed an incredible collective euphoric moment with the Egyptian Revolution in 2011 that very quickly shifted into collective failure and collective crushing. And when you go through a moment like this, it affects people differently. I started paying attention to how life is not black and white. It's just, there's a lot of complexity and layers. And I started seeing things in a more abstract way. And I started thinking a lot about the past and the present and the future as interchangeable, constantly interchangeable. I always think of them as, you put all 3 in a locked room and they're playing musical chairs, so there's only 2 chairs, and they're constantly switching roles and one of them is left out. So for Crystal Ball, when I wanted to make it, I bought a camera that was very specific, a Super 8 camera that was very specific technically. But when I bought it, I realized there was a problem with it, is that there was a crack in its metal body, and I knew what this meant. It meant that everything I shoot with this camera would look hazy, because there will be light entering on the film. And I didn't know if I was going to use it or not. But then I had the idea for Crystal Ball, and I started thinking about, the future, and the crystal ball is like what you look into to be able to tell the future. And I felt like this camera would be perfect for that, because, and I wanted to shoot in black and white, because black and white, creates this connection to the past, and then I'm talking about something in the future, and then all the footage is hazy and it has light leaks. so that was the thinking of it. So even within, and it's an abstract film. It's a lot of footage that seems unrelated, but in my mind, this is how any timeline is created. There's a lot of things that don't make sense, and we make sense of them. And that also, time is cyclical and history repeats itself differently, but it does. We see the same thing. The next generation is going to see the same thing that I experienced. They will experience it differently, but every generation gets a moment of enlightenment from collective failure.
I think the cyclical time that you're talking about and the jumping between past and future and present, like it's very evident when we're watching the films, especially when we're watching them in a row, the two of them, because you do make the leaps and connections one after another. And that also sort of, for me, tied it into the sort of beauty of the randomness, because it takes you out of a rational sequence of cause and effect, and then instead sort of opens this leapway for some kind of imagination. And that's sort of, I think, related to how you're approaching representation also. Somewhere you had said representation has to be more than what it represents. It's like in one of your interviews. And maybe that you don't remember. So I think that is also related to how art, particularly your art, sort of adds on to what's here, what we have around, to sort of our rational way of thinking, like language as we use it. Like it's quite different how you use language in your works, because it doesn't flow rationally, like it doesn't fit into those cause and effects. But yes, so I mean, the language thing
is intentional, but in general, what I do is I'm not really interested in telling people how to see things. I'm interested in giving whoever watches a film the tools to see things differently. How differently or how they will see it is nothing that I can control. It has a lot to do with how they see, with their backgrounds, with their experiences. And that's why there are gaps, because I really hope that people can fill these gaps with their own imagination, with their own logic, with their own emotions. The language is, I mean, it started as me enjoying to write in a kind of poetic, slightly absurd way. But then I really enjoyed it, and I realized there is a lot of potential in it. A potential in it growing in unpredictable directions for me. Like I write a certain way, but it also keeps changing as I get older. And
so it's not very cautious what you're, because when we first had our conversation via Zoom, we were talking about utopias and dystopias and how people were saying some of your films were dystopic in quality.
Yes.
And then today I was sort
pessimistic.
Pessimistic, yes. And then I've also read, for example, in the Deutsche Bank book, that they are sort of implying utopias. And then
those people did not read this book.
And when I was thinking about that, and when I was thinking about language, how totalitarian regimes or dystopias usually, it's like language is their biggest tool to control people, and it's like propaganda and advertising. And what you're doing is completely like chopping up that into pieces, reordering into something completely irrational, but something that works with connotations and sort of more, again, randomness and association, I would say. And I was going to ask, does it like, are you trying to relate to the psyche in that way? Like, is it supposed to be making unconscious connections, or?
I don't think I'm that smart. Okay. But the thing is, when you make things in an open way, all the possibilities are open. When you make a narrative that doesn't follow the logic of narrative, where it has a beginning and a peak and an end, then all the possibilities are open. When within every sentence there is a word that feels, you know, unexpected in the sentence, or a connection between several words or a connection between two words is unexpected, then you're creating that by default without trying to push it. And that's the thing. I don't want, because when you start pushing concepts with art, then you're getting closer to this idea of propaganda. When you start saying things as they are, then you're starting to be didactic. Mm-hmm. When you start telling me that you know and I don't know as a viewer, then it's just not interesting for me as the artist or for someone who's watching a film. The idea, I mean, for me, for example, the Dent, I made it, the first time I showed it was in Dubai at an art fair, mm-hmm. because it was commissioned by a prize that, you know, where you had to show it the first time at an art fair.
And it's the Abraj prize?
Yes, and then Abraj collapsed. The company went bankrupt. So that also, you know. When people, I was thinking about a lot of places. Of course, people immediately, it was made in 2014, everybody immediately said, this is about the Egyptian revolution. It wasn't about the Egyptian revolution. It was the complexity of collective failure. There was a revolution in Ukraine that I had witnessed before the Egyptian revolution. There was revolutions throughout history. There was an independence movement sweeping through African countries that nobody talks about. There was Lumumba. There was, you know, all of this was stuff that I've been reading about, that I was trying to understand how colonialism plays a role in everything that's happening until now. Trying to understand that moment when everybody decides what they don't want, but once they have to decide on what they want, and they create this wholly democratic structure, they realize they don't want what the other group wants. I was thinking about democracy being 2,500 years old, and you know, everybody talks about religion being reformed, and nobody's trying to reform religion at a time when it gets, nobody tries to reform democracy at a time when it gets manipulated time after time. So it's not about one thing, but then what happens is that I show it in Greece and people say, it's about Greece, because Greece had just had this economic collapse and they were, you know, dealing with that. I show it in Dubai and it's about Dubai because it's about, you know, building the society from scratch, and people see what they see in the work, and I really like that. That's very intentional. That's important.
It's in Turkey, I think, like watching the Dent. Again, it's the mayor bringing the circus to town. So you have a beautiful
to hypnotize
word.
Them with forgetfulness.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have that a lot.
Everybody has it.
So going more maybe specifically into the works, I'll check.
May I ask something?
Of course.
Yes.
You said that you aren't that smart. But you know, okay, the storyline may not connect, and the text may, you know, throw you to another place. But the sound and the movement, I think, is more common among people. It carries you to a feeling. Like if you're playing a sad music, it kind of brings out the sad mood. Do you plan that?
Yes. The sound is most of the time very subtle, but it's also the glue that holds everything together. The sound is the last thing that comes while I'm editing. I start composing the soundtrack while I'm editing. I collect sound samples. I have ideas about, you know, I have to use this sample, I have to use this sample. But how the sound is going to be is not something I can plan. It just happens. I just start layering things. I stretch samples, I reverse samples, I put them on top of each other. And then I kind of have an idea about what the feeling of this scene should be. And the sound creates that feeling. So the sound is very intentional, but it's also meant to not be too dominant in the film. The trick for me is always to create a film that flows, that where every element is, at least, you know, I think at the point of making the film that it's good, but together they work together well. Of course, as time passes, I watch certain things, and I'm like constantly cringing, and I think, how did I do this? This is horrible. But that's why I grow, and I...
Any examples on these ones?
No, not these ones.
No cringe.
It was
No cringe moments.
an earlier film that I made, and I watched it in a screening recently, and I was just going, oh, why did I agree to showing this?
And going on from the sound, I was very curious to see what is the sound in the Dent that is like the happy, jolly sound. It's like a tune that sounds very familiar. And, huh?
It's ABBA, yeah.
Okay.
What's the song? I can't remember. I can't remember the name of the song, but it's ABBA, and I recorded it somewhere, which I can't remember now. I tell you, I keep forgetting things. Yeah, I'm getting old. I can't remember where I recorded it, but I recorded it on a street. It was maybe at a street fair or something. And then there is a fair that happens very close to my house. And I could hear all those kids screaming the whole time. So the fair ride that keeps going like this, I filmed that from my window. And I could hear the kids screaming for 2 weeks nonstop. Oof. So it was very like emotional, but also annoying.
It was very, now
so I decided to annoy everybody else by making the film.
No, it's also now I just heard the dog barking inside. And actually that film, it starts, like we see, not a fair, but what's a parade. Like a military parade?
Yeah, it's a military festival.
But it's completely silent in the beginning, and we just hear the dogs barking. And
then the crows.
Yes, and that contrast of watching something with so much sound that's supposed to be like very festive, and then not hearing anything. Also, I guess there are a lot of tensions that you do. That's also one of the tools that you use, or is it?
I mean, sound is. I mean, silence is also part of sound. So there is sound, but it's very low in the beginning. Okay. When you see the clouds, there is a very low kind of humming sound that somehow resembles what you hear on a plane, where it's like just constant white noise, but it's very present, but it's not loud. Okay. And then you go to that scene in the military festival thing, and then you start hearing, you see a horse, but you hear a dog. Yeah. And you hear the crows, and and then it keeps going. And then you start reading about the story about I'm going to tell the story very quickly because I think some people haven't watched the film. So it's a story of a small town of 4 streets where people wake up one morning and they decide they deserve to have some sort of acknowledgement. So they decide they want to host the Olympics. And then they invite the Olympic Committee, and then the Olympic Committee is coming the next day, but they all party, and everyone parties and no one cared. Everyone partied and no one cared, and then eventually the next day comes and they're not prepared. So...
but then they do succeed to get famous, right? Because they have these concrete mixers that are thought to be dinosaur eggs.
So their mayor realizes he needs to do something, so he meets a traveling salesman who sells them concrete mixers and tells them that they're dinosaur eggs that were uncovered in the Amazon recently. And then they parade them throughout the four streets of the city. And as they wait for their steel bodies for the sun to crack their steel body of the eggs, the supposed eggs, I think they realize that they're concrete mixers, and they realize that they failed. So the mayor again decides to bring the circus to town to hypnotize them with forgetfulness. And as the circus arrives, we start a new parallel story that kind of sprouts out of this story, where the circus owner has a dream where he sees elephants mining gold in a subterranean meadow, a subtropical meadow, with their trunks. And so he wakes up. But
they're painted with zebra colors.
No, in the dream, they were not painted. He just sees the elephants, a herd of elephants, mining gold with their trunks in a subtropical meadow. So he wakes up and he tells his clowns and their wives to paint zebra stripe colors, zebra stripes on the backs of all the elephants, of the one elephant that's left in the circus.
Because the other three had committed suicide.
Yes. And then the elephant eventually sees its reflection in a water puddle. And that's how the dent is created on the outside of the hockey arena. And that's why the film is called The Dent.
And what is the obsession with animals?
Everybody keeps asking me this. There is no obsession. We don't live in the world alone. I need other protagonists. I can't just work with people. I think it's very important to acknowledge that we don't live in the world alone. And for me, it just comes naturally that I was always a curious person since I was a kid. I was always, when I was a kid, I was curious about insects. I used to play with insects and train them to do things that they never did. But yes, I failed. There was a point when I wanted to train a praying mantis to jump hurdles like a horse. Didn't work. I've always been very aware of the natural life that surrounds me. I hate hiking because the problem is when you hike with people, I want to stop and look at things and they want to hike. And then, so we don't hike. But I need complexity in the films, and I need other, different protagonists. So, nobody talks about, for example, that you see the clouds in most of my films. I do a lot of aerial shots. I shoot a lot from my...
Are they really protagonists, or are they sort of sidekicks to sort of humans' absurd desires?
I think the elephant is definitely more of a protagonist than all the inhabitants of the town. At least the elephant is named as an elephant.
And is there a specific significance or like a symbolism of the elephant to you? Because there are obviously a lot in language, like pink elephant, elephant in the room, elephant memory. But what was it to you?
The only thing that actually happened in real life in this film that's not fictional is the story of the elephant headbutting the hockey arena. I was doing a residency, a very strange residency in a small town in Quebec, in Canada, and supposedly that's the town where Cirque du Soleil started. Mm-hmm. So this is the reference: is that there was this very mundane hockey arena that was, they used it in the winter, in the summer it was empty. And that's where the residency was taking place. We were working inside the hockey arena in the summer. And every day when I entered, I saw this dent on the outside of the building that didn't make any sense. And for a whole month, I kept asking every single person, what happened here? The only explanation would have been a wrecking ball, but why would someone bring a wrecking ball? Like if you have a wrecking ball, if you go through the effort and money to bring a wrecking ball, then tear down the whole arena. But it was there. And on maybe, I think 3 days before I left, someone told me that the circus, they used to have the circus inside the arena, and one day when the elephant was entering, it just banged it with its head.
Wow. So that's when the whole story started for you.
So that's when I filmed the hockey arena, and I decided I'm going to build a narrative around this. And what stayed in it is the elephant, hitting it with its head, and the reference to the circus, but done completely differently to talk about collective failure and hopefulness.
The thing you said about that's the only factual thing, I was actually Googling today whether the tent for the World Trade Fair was actually destroyed when Hitler invaded Poland. This is a line in the film. And then obviously there was no such thing. And then there were a couple more examples, and I was like, how is he finding these random things that can only be reality? Like, they're too absurd to be in fiction. And yeah, I was thinking about like reality and fiction. And then and watching so in both of the films, there are these flying chairs in, what is Luna Park? The Fun Fairgrounds. And I was watching the films together with a friend, and she said, oh, remember this incident when there was a fanfare in Diyarbakir, and two of the night guards, they got on the flying chairs, and then because of the momentum, they started flying further and further away from the control box and couldn't stop. So one of them died.
Ooh.
And the other one, like, I don't know if this is real, but it's like one of these events that's stranger than fiction. And I think these are the things that also like your work sort of reminds one of. So it's like these things, they sort of to imagine other alternatives, which is something I really enjoy. When I'm seeing them, I keep like getting these other random facts and stories also.
See, it's all real. I mean, that could be in one of my films, this story. And it happened. People do really strange things. In general, humanity has produced some of the most irrational, stupidest endeavors ever.
And when you're creating these narratives, what are some sort of literary influences that you have, that you like most?
I don't really. I try really hard to not make any references to art history, because I think it's not that I mean, I know as much as one can know about art history. It's just I think I don't want the work to end up being absorbed in itself, or like, you know, becoming self-absorbed, or becoming just about like making references that anyone outside the art world wouldn't understand. So that's why you see references to things that are, you know, Hitler, the Amazon, but mostly existentialist theater, absurdist theater, songs,
any Borges,
lyrics.
Any Borges references? Not references,
No,
but
not
influence?
Yet. Not yet, no.
Because of the sort of labyrinthine structures and the shifts in time. That was one of the
I went through a phase when I was a teenager where I read, I think, almost every play that Jean-Paul Sartre wrote. And I think that influenced a lot the way I process reality. So I read a lot of plays by, Eugene Ionesco and Samuel Beckett. And I don't know if there's any direct reference, but it's just stuff that's in the back of my mind. Of course, listening to certain people who write lyrics in a certain way.
Like what? Like who?
Not gonna tell you.
Okay.
It'll become too obvious. Yeah, the references are mostly not artistic, actually.
And I'm going from stuff that is very general to very specific to works, but
Yeah.
I just saw in my notes again something very specific. Why are so in the Dent? There's a fishing village that is burnt, and then after 70 years, it's being rebuilt, and then
Forgot that part.
After sort of some sequences, the 70 years comes back, and it's talking about how the villagers are, I don't want to butcher your words.
It's okay, I can't. Go ahead.
But why specifically 70 years? That's why I was sort of trying to look for facts, because there are some things that are so specific. Was there any significance that no?
A lifetime of a person.
Ah, okay.
It wasn't like, yeah. I don't work with symbolism, and I don't work with very, like, yes, some references might, yeah, I do make references to certain things, but in this case, it was just, I was thinking about like the lifetime of a person, you know.
So it's one generation's village is burnt and it's no longer remembered. So they're trying to
Yes.
recreate that.
Recreate what was lost.
And is there, like, do you see a sort of vanity in that?
The important part is that once again they used wood. So it burnt because it was built out of wood, and then they rebuilt it and they used wood again. But yeah, I think I was just trying to talk about how, again, the film is about collective working together and how that works, how the absurdity in it, this moment of, because at the end of the film they also kind of accept to reenact the past without changing anything. They kind of like started looking at their ancestors, what their ancestors did, and they decided they don't want to try to have any sort of to become famous or be better than their ancestors, which is maybe where the pessimistic part comes. But I think that's also where eventually you have a person, an individual that comes out and says, I'm going to change things, and then things start changing. And you can't stand still, even if you try. If a group of people try to stand still, they can't stand still. There's always going to be progress. So, yeah, I got lost. I can't remember. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, I mean, I was asking you whether to sort of because there are a lot of, not only like both in the words and also in the images, we do see humans attempt to preserve things, taxidermied animals, I don't know, shots in museums, these people trying to rebuild the burnt village, etc., etc. And are you trying to point out to, for example, sort of the vanity of human to try to, you know, outlast time, or is it
a lot of different things?
Kind of
one of them is that.
Or yeah, what else?
But also, it's a very common practice for people to try to keep things the way they are. It's also part of why I personally hate collective tradition, because it's the opposite of moving forward. This idea of things recurring every year, and at a certain time you do the same thing without thinking about why you're doing it, or even if you're thinking, you just want to make sure you do it exactly the same. Ritual, collective tradition, whatever, everything around you outside of this thing that you're doing has changed. So eventually it becomes completely out of time and space. It doesn't fit anymore. It doesn't make sense. It's an empty romantic idea. At least that's how I see it. I know a lot of people disagree with this. But so part of it is the idea to preserve objects, memories, traditions.
And the futility of it, I guess.
Yes, yeah. And the futility of it in the sense, and the vanity as well, in the sense that you're not, it doesn't really help. You are going to die, so if you're going to die, why don't you actually do something meaningful with the time that you have, instead of being so busy keeping things the way they are?
Here I'm going to go all the way back to sort of shooting on film and then pickling it. And that was also when I was...
Oh, yeah, I didn't answer that part, sorry.
No, it's okay. When I was watching your films and sort of when I was reading about how of the diaristic quality of you carrying the camera and then going around and shooting things, that these ephemeral moments that cannot be captured, I was thinking, oh, it's so, and I do that, like I keep diaries frantically, and this sort of nostalgic attitude, sort of trying to like keep and hold on to that moment and the futility of it, and then the fact that you go back and then you pickle them, you expose them to complete randomness, and then you sort of pick them apart and then rejoin them, and you completely lose the original version and you completely let go of what you're trying to preserve. So it's almost as if you're like through the work coming to peace with that ephemerality, I guess. Would that be?
Because I'm not trying to preserve anything to start with. That's the part where this playfulness becomes integral to the work. I'm not trying to document reality. I'm trying to create another way of seeing reality. So if I'm going, so the thing about the difference between, let's say, painting and filmmaking is that if I'm going to film something, I have to film something. There has to be something in front of a camera. There has to be reality in front of the camera. With painting, I can create a world from scratch, just imagination, things that have never been seen before. Mm-hmm. Any painting in the world is something that has never been seen before. So if that's where you know, I like to think of everything I do as an expanded form of that medium. So I think of what I do as expanded cinema, because I try to bring filmmaking really close to painting. Because I want to represent reality in a way that has never been seen before as reality. So part of that is I realize that I'm working with a very tactile material, which is film. So why not change the image by changing the quality of the film, or the materiality of the film. So it started when I read online a blog about someone who put a roll of film in the dishwasher and then turned it on and then developed the film in a certain way. It gets complicated after that. And then I saw the images and I was like, this is amazing. I want to do that. So I went and bought exactly the same kind of film. I put it in the dishwasher, had it developed the same exact way. And the colors were not the same. They were not cool. They were not like brilliant. So I got really into it. I said, I have to crack this. I have to figure this out. And I kept filming, or at this point it was photographs. So I kept taking photographs and pickling the film in a lot of acidic household chemicals, anything from vinegar to Diet Coke. And eventually I started getting interesting results. So at some point I got to a point where I knew what I was going to get. 70% or 80% I knew what I was going to get, and 20% was randomness. And I was very happy with this percentage, because you need to have some randomness for things to go in unexpected directions, and then you create progress. But at this point, it was really more about this idea that you start with reality, you start with filming something. And then you change it once when you pickle the film. And then you change it once when you chop it up and start editing. And then you change it again when you create a fictional narrative. And then when you add, the narrative itself, like when you add let's say the text or the dialogue. And then when you add the sound. And then you come up with something completely new that no one has seen before.
And it's surprising to yourself also.
Yeah, of course. I kind of have an idea about what a film is going to be about, but the outcome is always completely, it's a process. It's a composition. It's something that keeps growing, and eventually you think it's enough, that's good. It's like a painting. You layer things, and eventually at some point you look at it and you're like, okay, it's good now. I'll stop.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yes.
If you haven't been a witness to collective failure, I mean, perhaps you still adopt a very absurd or funny kind of, funny, comical undertones in the text. But could it be like, I think it's very hard for our generation, believe in a revolution, especially because of what we witnessed in Gezi, elsewhere, everywhere, in the last 20 years. And before that, the failed generations before us, we've seen their example. So, in a way, this is all of our fate, but isn't there a way of transcending this? And would there be another language if you personally haven't, experienced the Egyptian revolution or the other revolutions as well?
Yes, because every day, every hour, I have experiences that take my life, and as a result takes my understanding of reality in a completely different, unexpected direction. Everything that happens is not something that I can plan. So if I go outside and I see something that takes me, every event leads to another event, and you can't really control the sequence of events. But at the same time, it's impossible to live one lifetime without experiencing collective failure. I don't think it's possible. Because
collective liberation is not going to take place. You're certain.
yes and no, because there's nothing special about this generation. All the things that we're experiencing now happened before. It's just they happen differently. The experience itself, you know, the events may be different. I mean, people went through the plague and wars that killed whole population and genocides. And what we're experiencing now is horrifying, but at the same time, it's just slightly different from other horrifying and life-changing experiences that other generations had. I don't think it's possible for anyone to live a lifetime without going through a moment like this.
Yeah, but then I hear a lot from friends that do not want to have kids. Cite, you know, the world is not worth living for.
It's going to end. The world's going to end. Yes.
Or, you know, the disaster after disaster. And I see a certain vanity that, you know, thinking that your child will not be able to outperform you. Like, you know, you do not have the child because you're so certain that your child cannot achieve what you failed to do. And that I take issue with. I mean, it's not what you're saying, but like, can't you transcend in a way, like, you know, this kind of new scenario that we've been programmed? Because, I mean, in a way, it's kind of hanging above our heads.
I think it really depends on the person. I mean, we are all subjected to the same things, but how we respond to them, it's always different. It depends on the person. I mean, I have children, and I think it's the most beautiful thing that ever happened to me. And I just told you that, yes, everybody goes through this. So it's how we respond to it. It's not, we're all different. Some people can move forward, some people can't. Some people can move forward in certain ways and none other ways. But I still think it's something that everybody goes through in their own way and in their own circumstances and their own time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? No, I think. Yes, please,
Yes.
Camilla.
It's very funny because I'm now doing the opposite way that you do, which I was doing a lot of works with movements of videos and stuff, and now I'm more into painting. And you did the opposite way. But nevertheless, when I was doing some videos, how do you know when it's ready? Because sometimes I will record something and think that it was ready, and then 5 years later I would look it again and want to edit again, and then I would really feel, okay, now it's finalized, but like after 5 or 10 years. Do you also go through this process, or when you have that moment that, as you said, that, okay, this is done, this is ready, it's always sure? How is that finalizing process for you?
I think when I say it's ready based on my understanding of ready at this moment in time. I mean, I was also talking about like seeing films from like a film I made in 2009 and not being happy with it now. But no, because I am very aware that without making this film, I wouldn't get to the next leap that I took in filmmaking to now. I understand that I was a very different person in 2009. My maturity, my understanding of the world, my perception, my understanding of the tools that I'm using, my experience with them is very different. So and I also, when I watch my films now, I see them as a chronology of my life. They come with memories. I know where I shot every piece of footage. I know what was happening in my personal life when I shot things. So I think it's very important to preserve these things as they are. I can make whatever changes I want to make in the new film I'm working on, but the old stuff has to stay has to stay the way it is, because that's how I measure progress in my life. Like for me, it's personally, I think it's important to keep them.
But you can use the same footage you have in different films also, right? Because you are digitalizing them.
I don't use the same footage I have in different films, but what I do is that when I go film, I also take pictures.
And then they go into
and then the pictures go into other photographic works that are about something different or approach, you know, they're like a completely different structure, completely different concept. So you find all of these connections between works, visual connections between works. So for example, the Dent, there's a scene with a guy who comes out with a taxidermy wolf, and he puts it in front of the camera.
Yeah.
And in the show that I will have at artSümer, there is this work that I started making between 2012 to 2016 called Every Subtle Gesture. It's 100 photographs with a caption underneath them of text. And one of them has an image of that wolf in front of the camera without the man, or with the man. I can't remember. No, it's without the man. So it's the same place, the same object, is just shot with a different camera, a different medium. You know, one is photography, one is film. But I don't use the same footage twice in like different films.
So you just
but the same places appear, or the same objects appear in different works. And talking about Every Subtle Gesture, I was thinking about the leap that happened between a very short, kind of like more simple, abstract film like Crystal Ball, that's like 5 minutes long, and then the leap that, you know, that was made in 2013, and then 2014 I made the Dent, which was the longest film at this point, which was, I think, 19 minutes, very narrative, very complex in the you know, the structure of it. And I realized that what happened in between is Every Subtle Gesture. I was making all of these photographic works, image, one line of text underneath it, image, one line of text. And this was kind of like how so it's not really a leap, because what happened was that somehow Every Subtle Gesture was some sort of a trial storyboard and script for the Dent. It wasn't, I didn't think of it this way. It's a stepping stone, yeah. It's a transitional phase.
But this is, you were telling before, how each work leads up to the next, with you finding new ideas. So
and the ideas are presented in different mediums as well, because it gives me more tools to think, like more broad.
And I guess this is also a good time to announce the exhibition at artSümer, which is opening on the 11th. And what is the name of the exhibition?
Every Subtle Gesture Casts a Shadow on the Future. So it starts with this series that I stopped making in 2016, and I'm showing a lot of them, over 50, I think. And then a new photographic series, which is called Defiant Witness, and where I am working with pickled photographs and pieces of the script of my films. So I'm taking the text.
That's why you were collecting favorite quotes on
Yes, I used the one that you like.
Thank you.
So there was, I take lines from the script of the films, and I put them on new images. So instead of like doing what I did before, with the image kind of appears in two different works, now it's the text that's appearing in different works, and it's somehow alluding to my films in a photographic way, but also alluding to Every Subtle Gesture as a series, the way you know, there's an image and a line of text, and how far they are from each other, how much they interpret each other, and how much there is a gap between them for people to connect the image and the text.
And that the further away the gap between the image and the text, I realized in the films, to me they became sort of like tests to my memory, because I see a completely different image and I'm trying to follow the narrative, and I'm trying to remember what is being talked about in the previous scene. And the more absurd, the better I could remember That's
Oh,
one
okay.
thing that I noticed.
It's very encouraging.
And also the fact that there was so much complexity in the image and in the memory, and the fact that my brain was constantly trying to make sense of it all. And even though I know it's futile, it's trying to remember and it's trying to make something coherent, was also sort of a constant reminder of things don't need to make sense. Like
Great. It works.
So that was my getaway from.
Yeah, it's more enjoyable for me when they're like further apart, because I really I mean there's always a hint, but the hint is in my mind. It doesn't. You don't have to see it, but it's never random. I never use a piece of text with an image that are completely random.
Yes, but your connections are probably way different than
my connections are my connections,
yeah,
not your
exactly.
connections. So at least I know the connection.
And if you have any more questions, because I think we're out of time. But yeah.
So the first time I saw the Dent was at this art fair in Dubai. I was really like very curious of what he produced. So I watched it. It was, of course, I started from the middle, but then I watched it from the beginning, and then I watched it again. So it's like 19 minutes. You make the calculation. I was almost there in an hour inside, and I walked out, and we ran into each other, and I couldn't talk to him. He said, "What happened?" So I have this dot here, like it's like a knot here. I think I'm going to go to the hotel. I can't say what I'm feeling. I just need to go and use it. Good?
I mean, it's great when people feel something. I think art is not just supposed to be intellectual. It's supposed to be something that makes you, something that does something. If it makes you think, it's great. If it makes you feel, it's great. But I think it's really important for art to make people feel something. I mean, feeling is very underrated in art.
The more you can't make sense with his works, the more the feeling comes out.
Mm-hmm.
You can't define what you're going through.
I think so.
There's always sense. There's always a logic behind what I do.
Yeah.
It doesn't, like you go through like 100 photographs with text. Not every one of them speak to you. So some of them strike. You're like, oh, okay, this is, yeah, talks to me. And 2 years later, 3 years later, some other work from the same series that you haven't realized before starts talking to you. So it's a very evolving, let's say, series. And his work is always, you can't consume it and finish it.
Yeah, it's same with the films. If you each time you watch it, you notice something different, and it triggers a completely different reaction depending on how you are that day, I guess. So.
Do you have like cinematic like this in mind? Because the way like randomness, like for example in the Mirror, Tarkovsky said the miracle happened with the editing and we finished it and stuff like that. And the end result is very poetic and very emotional, and there is a lot of ambiguity for the viewer because the same actress plays the mother and the actor. Anyway.
No, more experimental filmmakers, art experimental filmmakers. People like Bruce Conner and Stan Brakhage, people who experimented with you know, images and materiality and structure. I think it's more about creating different structures, the connection between image and sound and narrative, and how you can play with that. There are a lot of experimental filmmakers who also came after them that played with that and experimented with that and tried new things that I feel like I respect them a lot. Bruce Conner especially was very interesting for me. I saw a show that was like a huge retrospective they did of his work at MoMA in, I think, maybe 8 years ago. And it was a beautiful, reassuring moment because he worked with all kinds of seemingly unrelated things. He made films. He started by, there's this one very famous film where he collected a lot of footage of nuclear tests. It's a very powerful film, and it's shown on as a big projection from floor to ceiling, very, like you get absorbed in it and you see this mushroom cloud going up.
He was able to obviously film high quality because it's film, it can be enlarged to that.
He collected all the footage. It was found footage. So it was also, so this was happening at the same time as Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol was making 50s? His work in I think 70s, maybe late 60s, 70s, and he was in New York, and then Bruce Conner was in San Francisco, and he was making very experimental films, and he said, I don't want to move to New York. I'm not interested in any of that stuff. And he made lithographs that looked like they were made in the 1700s, very figurative, very traditional. He made photographs, very experimental photographs, photograms, where you take the picture directly on the paper. He made films, and seeing this show was a beautiful moment for me because I realized it's okay to be working with a lot of different things. And I really connect, it was reassuring. And then of course a lot of artists came after that but I don't look at artists when I work. I just, it's nice to know what other people did. You have it in the back of your mind, but you don't really, I think of a lot of things when I make films, but history of art is not one of them.
It's more like having friends that you can feel amongst.
You have kind of imaginary conversations with them, and then you end up making something that is very detached, but is informed by the conversation.
Well, thank you for this conversation with you.
Thanks to you.
And thank you all for listening.
It was fun.